In this episode, we move into a topic that may sound administrative at first, but is actually one of the most important early steps in effective risk work. Because no organization can understand its technology risk if it does not first understand the business it is trying to support and the information environment it depends on. Collecting and reviewing organizations' business and information technology, IT, information means gathering the facts, context, dependencies, priorities, and operating details that explain how the organization functions and what could be harmed if something goes wrong. For a brand new learner, this matters because risk assessment does not begin with alarms, attacks, or technical controls. It begins with understanding the organization itself. Before you can identify a meaningful risk, you need to know what the business does, which services matter most, what systems and data support those services, who owns important processes, and how the organization is structured to deliver value to customers, patients, students, citizens, or internal stakeholders. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyberauthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A helpful way to begin thinking about this topic is to recognize that risk work is only as strong as the information it is built on. If the organization collects incomplete, outdated, or superficial information about its business processes and IT environment, then the risks it identifies will likely be incomplete, outdated, or superficial as well. A beginner sometimes imagines that risk identification starts by listing threats, but that usually comes too early. First, the organization has to understand its business model, major services, operational goals, internal processes, external obligations, and reliance on technology. It also has to understand how information flows across departments, vendors, systems, and decision points. Collecting and reviewing this information creates the foundation for almost every later risk decision. Without that foundation, teams may focus on visible technical issues while missing the business context that explains why a system matters, how disruption would spread, or what kind of impact would actually be most serious. Business information is broader than many people first assume, and it includes much more than financial reports or executive strategy slides. It includes the organization's mission, products or services, critical business processes, legal and regulatory obligations, customer commitments, internal policies, operating model, staffing structure, major business initiatives, and the priorities leadership is trying to advance. It also includes less obvious but equally important details such as seasonal demand patterns, dependence on specific facilities, reliance on key individuals, growth plans, mergers, outsourcing arrangements, and service expectations that could change the importance of certain risks. From a risk perspective, this information matters because it helps explain what the organization is truly trying to protect. A payment system matters differently in a bank than it does in a school. A manufacturing control platform matters differently in a factory than it does in a consulting firm. Business context gives risk analysis meaning by showing what operations are essential, what disruption would affect first, and what consequences leaders would most want to avoid. IT information is just as important, but it should not be gathered in a narrow hardware-only way. When we talk about IT information in this context, we mean systems, applications, networks, databases, cloud services, data flows, interfaces, vendors, support models, identity systems, recovery arrangements, asset inventories, and the relationships between technology components that support the business. A strong review does not stop at naming systems. It looks at what those systems do, what data they process, who uses them, how they connect to other systems, and what dependencies exist behind the visible application or service. Beginners often picture technology risk as something attached to individual machines, but modern organizations operate through interdependent environments where one failure can affect multiple business services very quickly. That is why collecting IT information is not just about counting assets. It is about understanding the technology ecosystem well enough to see where concentration, fragility, overexposure, or hidden dependency may already exist. One of the most important reasons to collect business and IT information together is that the real value appears in the connection between them. A system inventory by itself does not tell you which applications are truly critical, and a business process map by itself does not tell you which technologies must function for that process to continue. Risk becomes clearer when these two views are linked. A customer billing process may rely on several applications, a network path, a database, a third-party service, and a small number of key employees. A payroll process may depend on specific timing, sensitive data, an external provider, and internal approval steps. Without connecting business and IT information, the organization may misjudge both importance and exposure. It may invest heavily in something visible but non-critical while underestimating a quieter dependency that could disrupt revenue, legal obligations, or customer trust. This is one of the biggest lessons for new learners. Risk does not live inside the business or inside IT alone. It lives in the relationship between what the organization needs to do and the technology and information it depends on to do it. A practical review also depends on identifying stakeholders, because different people hold different pieces of the organizational picture. Business leaders understand priorities, commitments, process pain points, and service expectations. Process owners know how work actually gets done, where delays occur, which steps are critical, and what kinds of exceptions happen in daily operations. Technology teams understand architecture, dependencies, support models, configurations at a high level, and system lifecycle concerns. Security, privacy, compliance, audit, and resilience personnel may each contribute a different perspective on obligations, controls, incidents, and operational weaknesses. If risk collection is done from only one viewpoint, it often misses important context. A technology team may know a platform is old, but business leadership may know it supports a service the organization cannot afford to interrupt. A business team may want speed and convenience, while security staff may recognize the control gaps created by informal workarounds. Reviewing information across stakeholders helps turn isolated facts into a more complete and realistic view of organizational risk. The quality of information gathering also depends on asking the right kinds of questions. Instead of only asking what systems exist, a strong reviewer asks what those systems support, what data they handle, who depends on them, what would happen if they became unavailable, and what alternate methods exist if they fail. Instead of only asking whether a process is important, the reviewer asks when it is most important, what external obligations affect it, how much interruption is tolerable, and which systems, vendors, and staff roles it depends on. This kind of questioning moves the organization beyond static inventories and toward operational understanding. For a beginner, this is a valuable shift because risk identification is not a scavenger hunt for isolated facts. It is a disciplined effort to gather context that reveals significance, exposure, and consequence. Good questions help uncover hidden dependencies, outdated assumptions, unsupported workarounds, and gaps between what leaders believe is true and what operating teams actually experience every day. Documentation sources matter too, but they should be used thoughtfully rather than treated as unquestionable truth. Organizations often have policies, process documents, architecture diagrams, asset inventories, system records, vendor agreements, data flow maps, business continuity plans, audit reports, issue logs, training records, project portfolios, and prior risk assessments that can all contribute useful information. These are valuable because they provide structure and history, but they can also be incomplete, outdated, or inconsistent with real-world practice if they have not been maintained carefully. A common mistake is to assume that documented information automatically reflects current operations. In reality, systems may have changed, informal processes may have emerged, and new dependencies may have appeared since the last time the documents were updated. That means review work should compare documentation against operational reality rather than simply copy what is already on paper. For CRISC thinking, this is important because trustworthy risk work depends not only on collecting information, but on judging whether that information is current, complete, and relevant enough to support sound decisions. Interviews, walkthroughs, and observation are often necessary, because some of the most important business and IT knowledge never appears fully in formal documentation. People know which process step always causes delay, which report is essential at month end, which vendor response is slower than expected, which workaround staff use when the main system behaves poorly, and which dependency would surprise leadership if it failed. These insights usually come from conversations and careful review of how work is actually performed. For a new learner, this is a useful reminder that collecting information is not just a paperwork exercise. It is also a people exercise. Mature risk professionals listen carefully, compare perspectives, and look for places where informal knowledge reveals real exposure. An employee saying that a process works fine may mean something very different from another employee explaining that the same process only works because two experienced staff members quietly fix exceptions every day. Observation helps reveal those realities and prevents risk analysis from being based only on idealized descriptions of how the organization wishes things worked. Another important principle is that collected information should be organized in a way that supports analysis rather than becoming a pile of disconnected notes. Facts become much more useful when grouped around business services, critical processes, systems, data categories, ownership, dependencies, and impact areas. If information is gathered without structure, teams may spend time collecting details they cannot later interpret or compare effectively. Good organization helps reviewers see which processes rely on the same vendor, which systems support multiple critical services, which business areas handle sensitive data, and where accountability is unclear. It also makes it easier to spot patterns such as concentration risk, outdated platforms, duplicated processes, weak ownership, or incomplete control coverage. For beginners, this is one of the hidden disciplines of risk work. Collecting information is not enough. The information has to be arranged so that relationships become visible and decision-makers can understand what matters most. A well-structured information review turns complexity into something leaders and practitioners can actually use when setting priorities. Reviewing organizational information also means evaluating quality, not just gathering volume. More information is not automatically better if it is inaccurate, stale, overly technical, or disconnected from actual decision needs. The reviewer has to consider whether the information answers meaningful questions about the business and technology environment. Does it identify critical functions clearly? Does it show who owns what? Does it explain major dependencies? Does it highlight where sensitive data resides and how it moves? Does it reflect current systems and actual business processes rather than assumptions from several years ago? These quality questions matter because poor information leads to poor prioritization. A long asset inventory may look impressive, but if it does not distinguish between minor tools and essential business platforms, it may do little to support real risk understanding. The point of review is to turn raw information into dependable insight. That requires judgment about completeness, relevance, consistency, and practical usefulness rather than simple accumulation of facts. This topic also connects closely to change because organizations do not stand still. New products are launched, acquisitions occur, cloud services expand, vendors change, teams restructure, regulations evolve, and employees develop informal workarounds when formal systems do not meet operational needs. All of these changes affect the accuracy of previously collected business and IT information. That is why this work should never be viewed as a one-time project completed and forgotten. A mature organization reviews and refreshes important information regularly, especially when major changes occur in strategy, operations, technology architecture, outsourcing, or compliance obligations. For a risk professional, this is a key lesson because the value of information decays over time if it is not maintained. Yesterday's correct process map may become today's misleading assumption. Keeping information current helps the organization identify new exposure earlier and reduces the chance that leaders will make risk decisions based on a business or technology environment that no longer exists in the form they think it does. Common mistakes in this area are worth understanding because they show how easily organizations can weaken their own risk programs without realizing it. One mistake is treating collection as a compliance checklist rather than a search for real understanding. Another is relying only on technical records and missing business priorities, or relying only on business interviews and missing hidden system dependencies. Some organizations gather information once, but never validate it against actual operations, while others collect far too much detail without organizing it around useful analysis. There is also a tendency to focus on formal systems and ignore shadow processes, end-user computing, unofficial data stores, or key person dependencies that never appear clearly in central records. These issues matter because risk often grows in the spaces between official documentation and real operational practice. A strong reviewer remains alert to those gaps and understands that incomplete visibility is itself a form of risk, especially when the organization assumes it knows its environment better than it actually does. A simple example helps bring this together. Imagine an organization believes its customer order process depends mainly on one sales platform and one billing application. On paper, the process appears straightforward and well-controlled. But after collecting and reviewing more complete business and IT information, the organization discovers that order fulfillment also depends on a manually maintained spreadsheet, a third-party shipping interface, a legacy inventory database, and a small group of experienced employees who correct data mismatches each day before orders can move forward. That discovery changes the risk picture immediately. What looked like one stable process is actually a fragile set of dependencies with hidden manual effort, third-party exposure, and concentrated operational knowledge. This is exactly why good information collection matters. It helps the organization move from a simplified version of reality to a more accurate one, and that more accurate view is what makes meaningful risk identification possible. When you step back and look at the full picture, collecting and reviewing organizations' business and IT information becomes much more than an early administrative task. It is the foundation that allows all later risk work to make sense, because it reveals what the organization is trying to do, what information and systems support that work, where dependencies exist, who owns important processes, and what could be affected if things fail or change unexpectedly. Strong collection and review practices connect business context to technology reality, validate documentation against operations, organize information for analysis, and keep that understanding current as the environment evolves. For a new learner, the most important takeaway is that risk cannot be understood in the abstract. It must be grounded in accurate knowledge of how the organization actually works. When that knowledge is collected carefully and reviewed critically, the organization is in a far stronger position to identify meaningful risks instead of merely guessing where its biggest problems might be.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.